They called my bakery dream just a silly hobby for years, but the moment it started making money, suddenly my lazy brother deserved half of everything I'd built. What they didn't know was that I'd been documenting every dollar he stole, every lie they told, and every family dinner where they chose him over me. And when I finally walked into that courtroom, I had evidence that would destroy them all. If you've ever had your dreams dismissed by the people who should support you most, this story will hit you right in the soul. Smash that like button if you believe hard work should be rewarded, and subscribe because we're about to witness the most satisfying family betrayal revenge you'll ever hear. My name is Janice, and for as long as I can remember, I've dreamed of owning a bakery. While my friends were out partying, I was kneading dough at midnight, experimenting with recipes and saving every penny from my part-time job. My parents, Joe and Kathy, called it just a hobby. My father worked construction, my mother was a secretary, and to them, real work meant punching a time clock. "Janice, honey, baking is a nice hobby," my mother would say, but no one ever made a real living from sugar and flour. My brother Isaac was their golden boy. 3 years older, working at an auto shop, spending weekends drinking beer and watching sports. He was reliable in that predictable way my parents understood. I was a weird dreamer. When I announced I was going to culinary school, the dinner table went silent. "Culinary school?" my father said. "That's expensive cooking lessons, not education." "Professional techniques for what?" Isaac laughed. "Making cookies? Get serious, Jan." But I was serious. I worked double shifts, saved every dollar, took out loans they wouldn't co-sign. I started selling muffins at farmers markets, $18 the first week. My parents laughed. $18 for a whole day's work, my mother said. You could make more at a real job. But week by week, I grew. 24 muffins, then 36. Word spread. When I finally rented a tiny corner space downtown, my parents didn't even come to the opening. "Call us when you get a real job," was all my father said. For 18 months, I built something beautiful. My little bakery, Janice's Kitchen, grew steadily. I landed restaurant contracts, expanded to 3 farmers markets, and was actually making a living. That's when Isaac suddenly started paying attention. Success, I learned, attracts all kinds of attention, and not all of it is good. My little bakery, Janice's Kitchen, started small but grew steadily. Word of mouth brought new customers weekly. I landed a contract to supply fresh bread to 2 local restaurants. The farmers market sales expanded to 3 markets a week. After 18 months, I was actually making a living, not a fortune, but enough to pay rent, buy ingredients, and even save a little each month. That's when my family suddenly started paying attention. Isaac, who hadn't spoken to me in months beyond grunts at family dinners, started showing up at my bakery unannounced. At first, it seemed harmless enough. He'd carry in a bag of flour, help move a heavy rack, chat with customers while I worked in the back. "Just being a supportive brother," he'd say with that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble his whole life. But then the visits became daily. He started referring to the bakery as our place when talking to customers. When I worked alone on busy mornings, he'd appear with coffee and act like he'd been there helping all along. The breaking point came during a particularly busy Saturday. I was swamped with a wedding order, 3 dozen cupcakes for a birthday party, and the usual weekend rush. Isaac strolled in around 10 a.m., fresh from what was obviously a late night, and immediately started telling a regular customer about improvements we're planning for the bakery. I said after the customer left. "Isaac, you don't work here. You help out sometimes and I appreciate it, but this isn't your business." His face changed instantly. The friendly mask slipped, revealing something cold and entitled underneath. "Wow," he said. "I've been busting my ass helping you for months, and this is the thanks I get? You know what Mom and Dad are going to say when they hear how you're treating me." And that's exactly what he did. That Sunday at family dinner, the intervention was waiting for me. My parents had clearly been prepped, their arguments rehearsed and ready. "Janice," my mother said before I'd even sat down, "we need to talk about how you're treating your brother." "Isaac has been helping you build that little business of yours," my father added. "He deserves some recognition for that." Recognition? I'd been paying Isaac $20 a day whenever he showed up to help, which was maybe twice a week, for carrying flour and charming customers while I did all the actual work. "Dad, I appreciate Isaac's help, but it's my bakery. I'm the one who—" "Family helps family," my mother interrupted. And when family helps build something, they deserve a share. Isaac has been talking to people around town, bringing in customers. He's invested in this too. Invested. The word hit me like ice water. Isaac had invested exactly $0 and maybe 40 total hours of carrying supplies and making small talk. I'd invested 3 years of 18-hour days, every dollar I'd ever saved, and dreams that kept me awake at night with planning and worry. He deserves a partnership, my father announced. 50-50. That's what's fair. 50-50. For carrying flour. I looked around that table at these people who shared my DNA, who'd watched me struggle and scrape and build something from nothing, and I realized they weren't seeing my success. They were seeing an opportunity. Not for me, for Isaac. I'm not giving away half my business, I said quietly. The explosion was immediate. Ungrateful, my mother shouted, after everything we've done for you. Selfish, my father added. Isaac is your brother. This family supports each other. But the worst was Isaac himself, sitting back with this satisfied smirk like he'd just won something. It's okay, he said magnanimously. I don't need a partnership right away. I'll keep helping out, keep building our customer base. She'll come around when she realizes how much she needs me. Our customer base, our business. That night, I went home to my tiny apartment above the bakery and cried for the first time since opening day. Not from sadness, from rage. The pure, burning fury of watching people who'd never believed in my dream try to steal it the moment it became valuable. But tears weren't going to protect what I'd built, so I dried my eyes, made coffee, and started planning. I wish I could say the family pressure stopped after that dinner, but it only got worse. My parents started showing up at the bakery randomly, checking on how things were going. My mother would make pointed comments to customers about how the whole family was involved in the business. My father would suggest improvements that somehow always involved giving Isaac more responsibility. And Isaac, he became insufferable. He started acting like he owned the place. He'd rearrange displays without asking, promise customers special orders without checking with me first, and worst of all, he began inserting himself into every conversation about the bakery's future. Janice and I have been talking about expanding, he'd tell suppliers. We're considering a second location, he'd mention to the landlord. Our 5-year plan includes catering services, he'd announce to anyone who'd listen. We had no 5-year plan, we had no expansion discussions, we had my dreams and his delusions, and somehow everyone seemed to think those were the same thing. But what really broke me was the money. It started small, so small I almost missed it. A few dollars short in the register at the end of particularly busy days. At first I blamed myself. Busy days meant rushed transactions, quick change-making, easy mistakes. But then I started paying closer attention. The discrepancies weren't random. They happened on days when Isaac helped out. They happened when I left him alone in front while I worked in the back kitchen. They happened consistently, predictably, like clockwork. I installed a better cash register system that tracked every transaction. The shortfalls continued, but now I could see exactly when they happened. Always during Isaac's shifts. Always in round numbers that suggested someone was skimming, not miscounting. When I confronted him about it, his response was masterful manipulation. "Are you seriously accusing me of stealing?" he said, his voice dripping with hurt and disbelief. "I'm your brother, Jan. I'm here helping you build this business, working for practically nothing, and you think I'm robbing you?" He was so convincing that for a moment I doubted myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the stress of running a business was making me see problems that weren't there. But then I found the bank statements. Isaac had opened an account at a different bank, thinking I'd never see the records. But when you live in a small town and your childhood friend Natalie works at the credit union, information has a way of finding you. She couldn't legally show me his statements, but she could mention that it was interesting how his deposits always seemed to happen right after my busiest bakery days. That night, I hired an accountant friend named Diana to audit my books quietly. What she found hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Over 8 months, nearly $12,000 had gone missing from my register. Not all at once, small amounts, carefully spaced out, designed to look like normal cash handling errors. But when Diana compiled it all together, the pattern was undeniable. Isaac hadn't just been stealing from me, he'd been methodical about it, professional even. And my parents? When I finally worked up the courage to confront them with the evidence, Their response was worse than I could have imagined. "You're being paranoid," my mother said dismissively. "Isaac wouldn't do that. He's family." "Maybe you need to look at your own bookkeeping," my father suggested. "Running a business is complicated. Maybe you're not as good with numbers as you thought." But the final insult came from Isaac himself. "Look," he said, sitting in my kitchen like he owned the place. "Maybe some money got mixed up. These things happen in family businesses. But the solution isn't accusations and suspicion. The solution is making this official. Give me the partnership I deserve, and we can straighten out any confusion about the finances." A partnership. In exchange for not calling the police about his theft, he was extorting me, with my parents' full support. That night, I sat in my empty bakery at 2 a.m., surrounded by the ovens and mixers and dreams I'd worked so hard to build, and I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to fight this battle on their terms anymore. I was going to win it on mine. Planning revenge, I discovered, was a lot like baking. You need the right ingredients, precise measurements, perfect timing, and the patience to let everything develop slowly until it's exactly ready. I started with a foundation, protecting what was mine. First, I restructured my bakery as an LLC, with myself as the sole owner and operator. Every asset, every recipe, every supplier contract, all legally documented under my name alone. I gathered every receipt showing I'd paid Isaac wages for his occasional help. I collected bank statements, tax filings, supplier contracts, insurance policies, a mountain of evidence showing that this business was mine, built with my money, my labor, my vision. Then came the beautiful part. I let Isaac think he was winning. When he demanded a formal partnership meeting with my parents present, I didn't argue. I smiled and agreed. When he brought up incorporating the business properly with him as co-owner, I nodded thoughtfully and said I'd consider it. When my parents pressure campaigned me at every family gathering, I started giving softer responses. "Maybe you're right," I'd say. "Isaac has been helpful. I should probably think about the future," I'd admit. "Family is important." I'd agree. They thought they were wearing me down. Really, I was buying time to build an unshakable legal case. The accountant Diana helped me document every fraudulent transaction. We found Isaac's fingerprints all over the missing money, literally, in some cases, since the new register system tracked who opened the cash drawer and when. We traced his bank deposits to exact dates and amounts that matched my missing cash. But I wanted more than just proof of theft. I wanted to destroy the narrative they'd built about Isaac being an equal partner in my success. So I documented everything. Every day Isaac didn't show up to work, which was most of them. Every task he'd claimed to do but actually hadn't. Every customer he'd allegedly brought in but who'd actually found me through word of mouth or advertising I'd paid for. The security camera I'd installed after the money started disappearing became my best friend. Hours of footage showing Isaac pocketing cash, showing up hungover, leaving early, and spending more time on his phone than actually working. Meanwhile, I gathered character witnesses. Customers who'd been coming since my farmer's market days before Isaac was ever involved. Suppliers who'd watched me build relationships and grow the business entirely on my own. Other business owners who could testify to my reputation and work ethic. The final piece was the most satisfying. I started secretly recording family conversations. It's amazing what people will say when they think they're winning. Isaac bragged to my parents about how he'd deserve at least 60% once they forced me into partnership. My mother talked about how the bakery could support Isaac properly once he was officially involved. My father discussed plans to expand using Isaac's name on the loan applications, since he'd be the real business mind anyway. They were planning to steal my life's work and then push me out of it entirely. When I finally had everything I needed, Isaac made his move. Emboldened by months of my apparent weakness, he delivered an ultimatum. "Look, Jan," he said, standing in my bakery like he owned it. "This has gone on long enough. I want 50% ownership, officially, or I'm going to have to explore other options." Other options. Like what? Stealing more money? Sabotaging my business? Running to mommy and daddy? "You know what, Isaac?" I said calmly. "You're absolutely right. It's time to make this official." The smile that spread across his face was pure greed. "That's what I've been waiting to hear," he said. He was still smiling when the process server handed him the lawsuit papers 3 days later. The day of the hearing, my parents strutted into that courtroom like they were attending Isaac's coronation. They'd spent weeks telling anyone who'd listen that I was finally coming to my senses and giving Isaac the partnership he deserved. Isaac himself looked confident, almost cocky. He'd worn his best shirt and actually combed his hair. He kept whispering to my parents and gesturing toward me like I was some wayward child who'd finally been brought to heel. They had no idea what was coming. When the judge called the case, Isaac's court-appointed lawyer stood up and began what he clearly thought would be a simple partnership dispute. He painted Isaac as a dedicated family member who'd helped build a successful business and deserved formal recognition. "Your Honor," he said, "my client has invested months of labor and brought significant value to this bakery. This is simply a matter of formalizing an existing business relationship." Then it was my turn. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Caleb I'd hired specifically because she specialized in business fraud, stood up with a folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Your Honor," she began, "this isn't a partnership dispute. This is a case of systematic theft, fraud, and attempted extortion." The first exhibit was Isaac's bank records, showing deposits that matched my missing cash down to the penny. The second was security footage of him pocketing money from my register. The third was recorded conversations of him bragging about how much he planned to demand once he officially owned part of my business. But the coup de grace was my documentation of his actual contributions versus his claims. Isaac had told everyone he'd helped build the bakery from the ground up. The evidence showed he'd worked maybe 6 hours a week for 8 months, had contributed $0 to startup costs, had brought in exactly 3 verifiable customers, and had actively stolen nearly $12,000. The judge's expression grew colder with each piece of evidence. When Isaac tried to explain himself, his story fell apart immediately. Yes, he'd taken some money, but it was compensation for unpaid work. Yes, he'd claimed to be a partner, but he deserved recognition. Yes, he'd demanded ownership, but it was only fair. My parents sat in the gallery watching their golden boy destroy himself with every word. The ruling was brutal and beautiful. Isaac was ordered to repay every stolen penny, plus interest and penalties. His ownership claim was thrown out completely. The judge also granted my request for a restraining order, barring him from entering my bakery or interfering with my business. But the best part wasn't the legal victory. It was watching the moment my parents realized their favorite child was a criminal and their silly dreamer daughter had just systematically destroyed him in court. The look on their faces was worth every sleepless night, every dollar stolen, every family dinner spent defending my right to exist. I thought that courtroom victory was the end of the story. I was wrong. A week later, my parents showed up at my bakery. For the first time in years, my mother actually tried to hug me. "Janice, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you can drop the charges now. We can be a family again. Isaac has learned his lesson. He's suffered enough." I almost laughed out loud. They didn't care when I was working 18-hour days to build something from nothing. They didn't care when Isaac was stealing from me. They didn't care when I was drowning in the stress of running a business while fighting off their constant demands. But now that their precious son was facing real consequences for his actions, suddenly I was family again. "You only remember I'm your daughter when it benefits you," I said, looking them straight in the eyes. "But I built this bakery without you. I survived Isaac's theft without you. I won that lawsuit without you. And I'll live my life without you too." The shock on their faces was almost comical. They'd never heard me speak to them like that, with confidence, with finality, with the voice of someone who'd finally stopped caring about their approval. "You don't mean that," my mother said weakly. "Janice, we're your parents," my father added. "No," I replied calmly. "You're Isaac's parents. You made that choice a long time ago." Then I walked them to the door, locked it behind them, and went back to frosting cupcakes for a wedding order. It was the most peaceful afternoon I'd had in years. Today, 3 years after that courtroom victory, my bakery isn't just surviving, it's thriving, beyond my wildest dreams. I've opened a second location in the neighboring town, with investors who believe in my vision, not my last name. I've hired 4 full-time employees who share my passion for creating something beautiful and delicious. Customers still line up before dawn for my signature sourdough, and every wedding season brings new clients who trust me with their most important celebrations. The local newspaper did a feature story about small business success in our community. I kept a copy on my office wall, not because I need the validation anymore, but because it represents something bigger than a bakery. It represents the dreams that people said were impossible, the hobby that became a career, the silly girl who proved she could build something real. As for Isaac, his reputation in our small town never recovered. Everyone knows he's the guy who tried to steal from his own sister and got caught. He moved 2 towns over after the court case, but news travels fast in rural communities. Last I heard, he was working at another auto shop, still living paycheck to paycheck, still blaming everyone but himself for his problems. And my parents? They're strangers now. Strangers who occasionally drive past my bakery and slow down like they want to stop but never do. They chose their side in a war they started, and they lost. But I didn't just win that war, I transcended it. Because the sweetest revenge isn't just proving people wrong. It's building a life so beautiful, so successful, so authentically yours that their opinions become irrelevant. Every morning, when I unlock my bakery doors and smell the fresh bread I baked before sunrise, I remember that teenage girl who dreamed of this moment while her family laughed at her silly hobby. She'd be proud of what we built together, not just the business, but the strength to cut off people who never deserved a seat at our table in the first place. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to prove your worth to people who've already decided you're worthless, and start proving it to yourself instead. And trust me, that victory tastes sweeter than any pastry I've ever made. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and cutting off the toxic people who never believed in you. If this story inspired you to chase your own dreams despite the doubters, hit that like button and tell me in the comments about a time you had to choose yourself over family. Subscribe for more stories about justice, betrayal, and the power of building something beautiful from nothing. Because sometimes, the sweetest victory is the one where you don't need their approval anymore.